We're talking Hall of Fame on today's Peacock and Williamson. What current NFL players are locks to get into the Hall, and what players are on maybe a track to Canton but might need a little more on their resume? Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Appreciate all of the everydayers out there. You can be one. Just subscribe up on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And Matt, there's a lot of great folks out there doing a lot of great work, and it's kind of list season right now in the NFL offseason as we get ready for training camps. And we've got our own lists coming up. A future episode, we're going to look at teams that we think will overachieve versus expectation, underachieve versus expectation. Tons of other stuff happening before the season starts here as we come at you every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. But an interesting article from the 33rd team, Matt, that talks about current Hall of Famers, and some we agree with and maybe some we don't.
Yeah, and they do very good work over at the 33rd team. A lot of former coaches and players and those guys contributing, and they put a lot of content out. And whether we agree or not, I just thought it would be fun to go through their list. You know, do we agree, or are there some names that are missing? Or there are some names that a year or two from now could be close to a lock or really on the path, and just a fun conversation for the middle of July. And I hope everyone had a great 4th.
And maybe even there are some players that are kind of bubble players that are close. That maybe 2023 is the year where they solidify themselves as a lock to become a football Hall of Famer. So let's start with where they start.
Let's start with this, though, just in case you guys are new listening, and I know we need more new listeners, spread the word. My man BP just doesn't give away Hall of Fame jackets like, he's a pretty strict grader. So if he gets a seal of approval from Brian, it's probably a stamp that dude's in.
Yes, I'm definitely a small Hall guy, so I might have some problem with players that they already think are locks here. So let's actually start there with their list of Hall of Fame locks. Who are current players that are a lock? Like, they're done, they retired today, they're already a Hall of Fame NFL player. And it starts with Aaron Donald, and I think, Matt, it's a pretty good chance that both of us agree with that assessment.
Yeah, and I'm defining lock as, I don't want me to sound morbid, but if he gets hit by a bus today, let's just keep it nicer. He just decides to retire and go off in the sunset on his horse. If he never plays another snap.
To me, a lock means you don't have to do anything else to be in the Hall of Fame, to become a Hall of Fame.
Right.
Your resume is Hall of Fame worthy already.
Done. Doesn't play another snap, doesn't do another thing in the football world, you're in. Aaron Donald epitomizes that. I think he's easily a top 5 defensive player of all time.
Yes. When you have defensive player of the years and all the all-pro, you're an all-pro every year, those are Hall of Fame type players. So,
yes,
he's got a ring. He's checked off just about everything you need to, even if you didn't, let's put it this way for Hall of Famers to be a lock too, is even if you didn't experience the era, because that's what's hard with past eras where maybe you didn't watch players. People who did were like, oh, this was the guy when they were watching it, right? Yeah. And that's how it's been for Aaron Donald. But then even if you put that aside and then you were just a historian 50 years in the future and you're going through and you're like, wow, look at Aaron Donald. Look how he dominated. Look, he has this many All-Pros, this many Pro Bowls, player of the year. Look at these sack totals for an interior defensive lineman. He was dominating this era versus his peers.
Yep. And I often reference Michael Lombardi, who does phenomenal work. He's been a GM in the league. He's been in the media now for a while, does a great job. He has a book out, and he has another one coming out very soon where he even tiers the Hall of Famers. Like, in his mind, and you'll probably back this up, the Hall of Fame's a little too watered down, and there's different levels of, true Hall of Famers. For example, I love Curtis Martin. He went to Pitt. Good for him. But I think he's a bottom tier Hall of Fame running back where Walter Payton isn't. These locks, these Aaron Donalds, to me, should be no-brainer, top of the list. And while you were saying, even if we didn't see their era, you and I didn't watch Dick Butkus play at all, but he's a Hall of Famer. I know that. I think 30 years down the road, they'll say the same thing about AD.
Right. Yep. I totally agree. And I'm interested to see that book from Michael Lombardi too, because I totally agree. There shouldn't be tiers in the Hall of Fame, because that's the point of the Hall of Fame, is like, oh my God, this guy's a Hall of Famer. You shouldn't need a discussion where it's like a split jury. It's a hung jury where you need to get to that 1% to get a guy in the Hall. It's like you walk into the room and it's like, yep, he's a Hall of Famer. Cool. Good meeting. Let's go home.
It shouldn't be a 3-day process or whatever.
It takes that one. And so the next guy here on the list is Julio Jones. What do you think? Julio Jones, he's put up some amazing numbers in his career. Recently, though, so banged up and hasn't been able to put together the second half of his career like he has, the first, 7 years or so of his career.
I think he's also a no-brainer, but he brings up an interesting conversation for the sake of our podcast today, in that there are some players. I mean, Julio Jones isn't on a football team, so he's not active as we speak. He's not getting a paycheck. He is not active. Nobody has hired him. He is unemployed, whether he wants to be or not. And there's other dudes like that are either recently retired or currently floating around out there unsigned. And I hope, new people to the NFL don't just think of the last couple of years with Julio. I mean, Tennessee and some of these things, because I thought he had not a Moss or Rice dominant stretch, but really over the last 15 years, I think he is the strongest case of any receiver. And I thought he was the first or second best wideout, at least for a 5-year stretch, if not more.
I think Julio will probably get in. I have a hard time putting him that locky.
You're not stamping him.
I get him that locked in right now. I think there's going to be a little conversation there because of some of the numbers that are put up in the past and going forward. Because receiving numbers aren't going away; they're going to go up. Actually, there's 17 games a season now, and there's guys. The league is even more skewed toward throwing the football. So that'll be an interesting conversation when you start voting on Julio Jones 5 years after he retires, and maybe he plays another season this year, maybe he plays a couple more seasons, who knows? And then you're 10 years removed from his prime.
Mm-hmm.
What will it feel like then? And I think that'll be a big question for Julio Jones. But man, he was one of the most dominant at his position during his era for sure.
Yeah, I think I give that a little. Well, I don't want to speak for you, but in terms of Hall of Fame stuff or all-time great stuff, my number one criteria is how good were you against your contemporaries. And I always use this example because it's so extreme, that Babe Ruth hit more home runs than like half the teams in the league. That's just dominating your era. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes.
So
change the game.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like he's just, that's the perfect example to me. And I'm not saying Julio's Babe Ruth, but he was number 1 or 2 for a pretty long stretch.
Travis Kelce, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. He feels like a lock no matter what happens the rest of his career.
Can quit today. I mean, maybe he's not the best tight end ever, but he's probably top 3. Gonzalez, Gronk. You could go old school with a Ditka or somebody like that. But, I mean, this guy is still dominant and is still racking them up, as is his quarterback.
I have a problem with saying that Mahomes is a lock. He's clearly, obviously on a Hall of Fame track, but
yeah,
is he a Hall of Famer already? He doesn't play another down in the NFL. He says, "Oh, you know what? I've got some business interests. I want to go travel the world. Yeah. I want to do something else with my time." He is a lock Hall of Famer 5 years into his career.
I mean, he could Andrew Luck it and just surprise us all one day and be like, "Yeah, this was fun. This was too easy. I'm going to go do something else and be a businessman or whatever." I would not put him as a lock, but I would vote for him every time he came up. I think that you can't have a better 5-year career than this guy has. I mean, on his bad years, he's like 3rd runner-up for MVP and loses the AFC Championship game. So I think his start to his career is the best in history at the most important position. And I would always vote him yes. But a lock is a big word. Like, doesn't have to do a thing.
Exactly. So I would put Julio, I would put Patrick Mahomes in the likely Hall of Fame category, not the lock category. In the last 2 sentences here, the last 2 lines in this write-up, and again, you can find it at 33rdteam.com. A trailblazer Yes, absolutely. No discussion needed, they say, about him being a lock. And like, no, there's
a
discussion
little
needed
discussion
today. Will he get? He'll get there because he's not going to
Of
retire
course.
tomorrow, and hopefully, knock on wood, nothing crazy happens health wise for Patrick Mahomes, and he can continue because I want to see where his career goes. And he's very likely to get in the Hall of Fame. Is he a lock now? No.
There would be a lot of discussion in that room. Like,
He
hey,
could
he's
still
awesome.
get voted in now, but I'm
Right.
not saying he's a lock.
Yeah, no discussion needed is where you lose me on Mahomes as a lock.
Quite a few lock players here, according to 33rd Team. Let's get into the rest of those and some of the likely Hall of Famers that are on a Hall of Fame track and what they need to get into. Canton, next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 on your first bet and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose on that first bet, you'll get that $200 in bonus bets by just betting $20 with your first bet at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from money lines to over-unders to who you think is going to hit the first home run in a game. Tons of ways to bet Major League Baseball. Build your own parlays. Of course, there's baseball every day, almost all summer long. It's the soundtrack to summer. I love just putting on a baseball game, letting it play in the background, even put on some music aside just to kind of hang out throughout summer. I mean, I love how baseball is just every day. You can always find a baseball game on no matter what coast you're living on too. But of course, you can still bet on NFL football as well. Future champions of the league. You can bet on rookies of the year. You can bet on specific statistics, and weekly lines are already up and over-unders for your favorite team. No better place to bet on anything. Major League Baseball included at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Just sign up today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, let's continue with some of the locks here, according to 33rd Team, that are current players that are already locked into Canton, Ohio. By the way, have you been to the Hall of Fame? I assume you have, since you live in such close proximity and you worked in Cleveland for a time.
I should mention this because this was very, very cool. I mean, first of all, it's less than 2 hours from where I'm sitting right now. So as a kid, my uncle took me once, my dad took me once, like I would be up there a couple times and before I was 20, 2 or 3 times, and loved it. But what's super cool is when I was a director of football ops at Akron, there's a rule that you can host, recruiting events X amount of miles from your campus. Well, the Hall of Fame fit the parameters. They were in that circle. So our Saturday night visit weekend that you can pay for, we always had it at the Hall of Fame, where it was just the kids, their parents, and our coaching staff. And I would kind of roam those hallowed halls like nights at the museum. It's just like 20 of us in this building. And we did it every Saturday for like 8 weeks in a row. It was super cool.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. That is really
cool.
Because more than anything, it's a museum, right? And that's
right. Yeah, I feel like Robin Williams should be talking to you or whatever,
And that's one of the other things about Hall of Fames is like Barry Bonds is probably not going to get into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame anytime soon, but there's Bonds stuff in the Hall of Fame, in the museum.
Yeah.
Like, he's not erased from history necessarily. So that's the other thing with some of these, borderline Hall of Famers. I think I'm a small hall guy, but like when someone does something special, there's a baseball in the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's a signed football. There's a jersey from this thing that happened, even though this is not a Hall of Fame player.
Yeah, there's a clip of Odell's catch or something, things like that.
Yes, exactly.
Yep.
Dallas Cowboys guard Zack Martin, a lock for the Hall of Fame, man.
Again, lock is a really strong word. I think he's absolutely in. I just don't know that he's John Hanna, Steve Hutchinson, all-time great, but I think he is almost the definition of a Hall of Fame guard. He's tremendous.
I think he'll probably get in, and it's easier with players who are a little bit later in their career, and he's been great for multiple decades. He was an all-decade of the 2010s team member, and we're already
deep into the 20s now. Yeah.
Bunch of all pros. So, and the longer you play, the more likely it is for Zack Martin to get in. So,
especially for a guard,
I think that one's even more likely than Julio, even though statistically it's hard to. And in a lot of ways, I think for offensive linemen, not having statistics makes it easier.
One thing I worry about, total side note, is I hope 4 or 5 years from now, and hey, we reference Pro Football Focus all the time, but I hope the presenters aren't like, he had an 82 grade, and like, I don't look at that stuff as gospel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the voters are not young. Like in 40 years, maybe, but the current voters are not old enough. I'm sure PFF grades don't come up at all in those conversations. Right?
I hope they don't carry a ton of weight even 40 years from now, though.
Right.
You know,
I don't.
You know what I mean?
It's more of a counting stat.
Yeah.
Museum than a what were you graded at museum, because that's just feel, and and he's just been the best guard in the league for a long time, so that's the feel thing that's going to get you in probably.
I don't know what the negative column is on the Zack Martin discussion.
It's hard. Yeah, it gets pretty hard. It's you have to just kind of fall apart, and people forget how good you were if you don't play great at the end of your career, which is what hurts Julio.
I think this guy's similar. I mean, he's a flashier player. Yeah. I mean, and I know he was hurt last year, but did really good things with the Rams, was an impact player even with the Bills. I don't see a lot of negatives to keep him out.
It's hard because I don't have all the stats up in front of me. Just based on feel, I think he's more likely than guaranteed. I want to see where his sack numbers and other things match up historically. But he seems like a guy that's going to get in. So he's pretty close to a lock, and his career's near the end. So it's not like there's a lot more needed to go on his resume for what he's going to, turn into the Hall and say, what do you think? Can I get in?
Yeah. 2 Super Bowl rings helps a lot too.
Aaron Rodgers has a ring. Forget MVPs. He feels pretty darn easy to say he's a lock.
Yeah. Move on. Forget about it. Easy one. I mean, that's
Here's
almost Brady-esque,
Justin Kicker, the best at his position maybe ever. He seems like he should be a lock. Is it that? Can you can a kicker be a lock?
I've talked about this before, and my thoughts have not changed. And it's kind of two sides of the coin in that, with all respect to Jerry Rice, I think the gap between the best kicker, Tucker, and whoever number 2 is greater at this position than any in football. The only side of the coin that hurts Tucker is because the format of the Hall, you have to keep somebody out to put him in. Like if it comes down to Zack Martin or Justin Tucker, I have a hard time putting Tucker in. But I've never seen a kicker that's more of a weapon, that's won more games. Trust me, as a Steeler Raven, watching all those things, you knew as soon as the Ravens got past midfield, the game was over. I mean, I think he's a lock, but it might take more time than it should.
It's unbelievable. Only Jan Stenerud. I didn't think I was going to mention Jan Stenerud. Jan Stenerud and Morton Anderson, only place kickers that are currently enshrined in Canton.
Yeah. And they even say here he's going to follow Adam Vinatieri. I'm sorry, Vinatieri fans. Tucker's 10 times the kicker Vinatieri is. Vinatieri lasted like my whole lifetime. I don't think he should be go.
He might still get in first. I don't know if he's going to follow Vinatieri,
right,
but we'll see. We'll see if Vinatieri gets in, but that'll help Justin Tucker get in for sure.
Yep.
Last 2 on the locks list, current players, both have been multiple-time Pro Bowlers and All-Pros and were thought of at the best of their positions during their careers. It's Bobby Wagner and Trent Williams. And I almost don't like jumping ahead with some current players and be like, I'd like to see a couple more years of these 2 guys. But clearly they're towards the end of their careers. I think they've both pondered publicly retirement in the last 12 months or so. Bobby Wagner and Trent Williams, it feels pretty good that those guys are going to get in.
Yeah, stamp, boom, they're in. It also helps, unlike maybe a Russell Wilson, and he doesn't even have the longevity these guys do, that both these guys were very, very good players in 2022 and might be again this year. So I absolutely think both are in without much hesitation.
I agree. They feel stronger than some of the names ahead of them, to be honest with you, on the list.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go through some of the likely Hall of Famers that they have here. Again, these are likely Hall of Famers according to 33rd Team. I'm going to list all of them. Then, Matt, we're going to come back and kind of pick apart a couple that we decide that we think shouldn't even be considered likely Hall of Famers, or some that have maybe not much to go or a lot to go, in our opinions, to get into the Hall of Fame. That starts with Titans running back Derrick Henry, Tyreek Hill of the Chiefs and Dolphins, Philadelphia Eagles offensive tackle Lane Johnson. We've got Cam Jordan of the Saints, Jason Kelce, Travis's brother, of the Philadelphia Eagles, Quentin Nelson of the Colts, Jason Peters, offensive tackle, currently not on any team, but played so well for so long for the Philadelphia Eagles. Russell Wilson of the Broncos, Devontae Adams, Joel Bitonio is on this list. Fletcher Cox, Myles Garrett, Khalil Mack, Cordell Patterson. Wow.
Yeah.
Did not expect to see his name on this list. Jalen Ramsey, Matt Ryan, who I believe is retired and now heading into the broadcast booth. Matthew Stafford, Ndamukong Suh. Those are the list of likely Hall of Famers. Let's dive into that next. I do want to thank everybody once again for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. So, Matt, of those players, I think we're going to have a long conversation about running backs. So we got to talk Derrick Henry here. But just immediately, two names jump out. One, Lane Johnson. I'd probably put him closer to the Trent Williams lock category than the likely category that he needs to do really a whole bunch more to get in. Maybe I'm overvaluing the offensive tackle position there, but I think he's been thought of as the best right tackle in the NFL for most of his career, like Trent Williams has the left tackle. And maybe he's just a year or two behind Trent as far as age, but I can't remember. What year was Lane Johnson drafted, by the way?
He came out.
Trent Williams was 2010, I believe.
I think Johnson's a little younger than that, but don't quote me on that. They're similar. Yeah, they're similar.
So and then the other one is for Cordell Patterson. There's no way his name is on a list like this. Like, I don't even know what the argument is.
Right. I mean, I know he has the most kickoff return for touchdowns ever. But, like, if Hester can't get in, I can't give it to Cordell Patterson. I mean, sorry. I have a hard enough time with the Tuckers of the world, who I think are slam dunks.
In a word, really quick, sorry, this might derail things. Hester, he's everyone talks about him, how he has to be in. It's like, no. He scored less NFL touchdowns. You talk about, he's the greatest kick returner of all time. He scored less NFL touchdowns than guys like Jerry Rice did in one season. What are we talking about? He had no impact on the game as a whole. He was fun to watch, sure. Put some of his highlights on a reel. It can. That's not a Hall of Famer to me because he returned a few kicks.
Everyone was scared to death to punt to him. Okay, so they punted out of bounds and they lost 5 yards of field position. You know what I mean? Like, all right. I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not. Boy, put him in. I'm with you 100% on Lane Johnson. Just two notes. Very few right tackles in the NFL, but I think there will be more and more because they're starting to become more and more interchangeable. I think it helps him a lot that the Eagles have been so good for the last couple of years at the end of his career too. One little nugget, though, that I just think you can't ignore, and I'm not giving him a hard time, but he has been suspended, I think, for PEDs once or twice. You know, like that doesn't help a ton, you know.
That'll hurt him with some voters for sure.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I would look at someone like Cam Jordan and it's like, man, really good career. He's like the poster boy for Hall of Very Good. Good job. Go in the Saints Ring of Honor or something, but you're not a Hall of Famer to me.
Right. Maybe even retire his number, but not a Hall of Famer.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree there. It's going to be tough for some offensive linemen. Jason Kelce was really good for a long time. Quentin Nelson is like the next version of what we talked about with Zack Martin. So if Nelson's career continues as it started, he'll kind of have to get in if Martin gets in. And if a player like Martin doesn't get in, then maybe a player like Quentin Nelson doesn't get in.
I think this is too early for Nelson to even have him in this category. I mean, like on this list, he's next to Kelce and Peters. I mean, Kelce's in. I mean, Kelce's a top 3 or 4 center ever and is now winning Super Bowls. I think Peters probably goes. Nelson's coming off a bad year. And I mean, it's not the Mahomes argument where I've had 5 unbelievable years in the league. I mean, you got to play 10 years as a guard. Nelson would not be in this category for me.
It's pretty early. I mean, you might as well put Justin Jefferson's name on the list.
Yeah, right.
He's on. It's like, okay, crazy. He's like one of the best starts ever, but you still got to do it at 10 more years. Maybe not at that level, but you got to be really good for a long time to it takes a while to get into the Hall of Fame. And so at some point you got to slow down and be like, okay, let's wait and let this guy have a career first before we talk about Hall of Fame and putting his, bronzing his face and giving him a gold jacket. Let's wait more than 5 years of his career.
Yeah, and I may even give Jefferson a better chance. I mean, I think the start of his career is even better than Nelson's.
I totally agree. And receiving numbers aren't slowing down at all. That's for sure. Interesting with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams. And I don't.
Yeah.
So Devontae Adams is 3 years behind Julio Jones.
Okay.
I feel like Devontae Adams right now is just as good, if not better, resume for the Hall of Fame than what Julio's was 3 years ago. Am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy. I'm not sure I 100% agree, but I hadn't thought of it in that light. But that year they put in with the Raiders, you can't say, oh, he's just Aaron Rodgers Pippen. I mean, that's not it at all. I think his case is getting very, very strong. I also think Tyreek and Stephon Diggs are really strong too. I mean, I'm not sure I would stamp them, but 2 more wide receiver 1 type seasons, I think all 3 of those guys probably go.
Joel Bitonio, does his name belong on this list? Am I sleeping on Joel Bitonio?
Really good player. I mean, no, I can't go there. I mean, I'm not saying he has no chance, but I need 4 more years of going to the pro. I mean, not just going to the Pro Bowl, being one of the best guards in the league. Like, he's not Zack Martin.
I think quarterbacks like Matt Ryan are a perfect example of Hall of Very Good players, especially with how stacked the quarterback classes are going to be. I feel like he's on the outside, and I wouldn't put him in a likely category as good as his career was.
I agree. I mean, one tremendous season with Shanahan, some rocky roads in between, really good year, retires number in Atlanta, Hall of Very Good. Him versus Stafford, to me, is a conversation. I think both of them are on the outside looking in, but great careers.
Russell Wilson as well. Russell and Stafford got rings, and Matt Ryan did not.
Right. However, we may have even had this conversation 1 year ago, because I was asked this often when he left Seattle. Is Wilson a Hall of Famer now? And I will say 1 year ago, I thought, if he doesn't play again, I think he probably gets in, but isn't a slam dunk. 70% chance. How much should I hold one terrible year against him? But but it didn't help his cause.
He needs to rebound from that bad year.
Yeah.
And when you change teams, you got to prove you're still good on the other team. I think that's a pretty big one for Russell Wilson, especially since he doesn't quite have the resume of someone like Aaron Rodgers. If he doesn't play again,
sure,
he's not there yet.
And Matthew Stafford, Seattle, super strong either.
People asked us a lot. As soon as Matt Stafford won his ring, did that stamp his his Hall of Fame legacy? And I wasn't so sure. And so
I wasn't either.
And again, I'm a small hall guy, so it shouldn't take long to really. It shouldn't take a long conversation to figure out if someone's in the Hall of Fame. And so a lot of these guys I would not put in the likely category. I would say they still need more work.
I tend to agree. Stafford and Ryan, I really lumped together. And right when he won that Super Bowl, probably was his peak in terms of his stock was the highest for his career. And I get that. But I don't think he has any chance to follow it up and be in the NFC Championship game this year or, lead the league in passing. So probably won't do enough.
Same with Jalen Ramsey's interesting because he was among or the best corner in the league for a time. I would love to see Jalen Ramsey, and because of who he is and how he plays, I think he could absolutely do it. As have almost like a Charles Woodson, Rod Woodson, half of his career where he plays at a high level and just plays inside, plays safety, right? He's always starting to play some more nickel star role type stuff. I would love to see that, and that would really stamp him in the Hall for me.
Yeah, me too. And maybe when he's 34, he's playing deep middle by himself and not putting his way in harm's way. Like you said, both Woodsons, that type of deal. Yeah, I need to see more. I mean, I think this is exactly where he belongs in the potential Hall of Famers.
So one I have a problem with, and I don't know if you do as well, is Derrick Henry. I don't think that he's a likely Hall of Famer because I just don't know how much more he can put on his resume. He has to play multiple seasons and play at a high level. And we know what happens with running backs these days and how quickly he can collapse after the age of 27, which is right the area that Derrick Henry's hitting. Like, this is the time when it ends for running backs. And a lot of running backs looked amazing up to age 27 and 28. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, there wasn't much in their 30s. Every Hall of Fame running back was awesome in their 30s. Every single one of them, right?
Yeah.
Except for I don't know who, Gale Sayers, maybe. I don't.
Yeah, Terrell Davis. Gale's a couple of those guys were short lived, but
and
not
Terrell
many.
Davis started late, so he was
true.
even doing more than Derrick Henry, I think, at a certain point in his career in his 30s. So it's going to take some time. And when you put rushing yards for Derrick Henry, even against guys when in his era that overlapped, like Adrian Peterson and Frank Gore, he's coming up short right now. So he's got to play a while to still get there, to me.
So I do think this is a really interesting one and could maybe even be a whole podcast. And I know we've talked about it before, but he entered the league in 2016. And I would say no one since 2016 has a better Hall of Fame resume based on my Babe Ruth comparison. What did you do compared to other running backs every year since 2016? And I think he's probably the best resume since Peterson. But as you mentioned or alluded to, Adrian Peterson's the 5th all-time leading rusher. Derrick Henry's the leading rusher amongst all active running backs, just ahead of Ezekiel Elliott, who's another conversation. But he's 42nd all-time. Peterson's 5th. Henry's 42nd. I mean, he's behind Willis McGahee and Terry Allen and Amon Green. I mean, like, guys you wouldn't even consider, So I can see both sides of it, I guess, is my logic on him.
And you talked about how Quentin Nelson is way too early to put him in this conversation. He's not far off age-wise to Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's 2016 draft?
2016 draft, right.
And he's 28, I believe. And Quentin Nelson's 27, and I think he was 2018 draft. So 2 years later in the draft, I think all-pro votes, they're probably not far off. Has Derrick Henry made 3 all-pros?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah,
Harder position to go.
With running backs, it's like it feels like he's been in the league a long time, but he really hasn't. And so he needs some more counting stats for sure.
Yeah. I think raising the bar at receiver and quarterback from 10, 15 years ago is logical for statistics, but I think we have to lower it for running backs a little bit too. I mean, I don't know.
As they put it here, they talk about a 2,000-yard season. Is that like okay, this guy ran for 2,000 yards? Not many have done that ever. You're a Hall of Fame guy now.
Is that like a McGuire Sosa home run?
Right.
Season?
Yeah. You get 60 homers. You're a Hall of Fame dude.
Yeah, I get it. Because I think we stole this from Robert Mays' podcast a while back that someone asked them, will there ever be another Hall of Fame running back? Well, I don't think anyone's going to ever run for 12,000 yards again, like the top 15 or 16 on this list, let alone 18,000 yards like Emmett. But there should be another Hall of Fame running back someday.
Well, that's what makes it difficult for Derrick Henry in his era, because Frank Gore did run for that many yards. He's 3rd all time.
Yeah. I'd rather play against Frank Gore than Derrick Henry, though.
Oh, no doubt. Right.
Yeah,
but when you start stacking up stats, and Adrian Peterson's way ahead of Derrick Henry, and their careers overlapped. So you can't even it's hard to even match him up against players in his era, because those guys will be considered his era still when you look back 5 years after Derrick Henry's career. So unless he keeps going is what I'm saying. So he absolutely could get there. It's not like he's done. I'm not like saying he just retired or anything, but if he did just retire, I don't think I wouldn't say he's likely to get it. He needs to add to that resume quite a bit.
This could be a whole nother podcast too, though. But I think Christian McCaffrey is on the pace to get in. If you're going to mention Nelson, Mahomes is different, but I mean, guys that have been in the league 5-ish years, I think McCaffrey's been an unbelievably dominant player, first pick in fantasy drafts year after year. But I just pulled it up. He's the 168th all-time leading rusher.
He's going to have to get in because of his receiving ability.
Right.
And his receiving ability is going to have to allow him to have a much longer career, too.
Yeah. Russell Wilson has more rushing yards than Christian McCaffrey.
Wow.
Isn't that mind-boggling?
That's a heck of a stat right there.
I'm just looking at the list. Yeah. Randall Cunningham's ahead of him. Wow.
That's one of the players. I think it's a good segue to throw out the question to our listeners for tomorrow's mailbag. We're going to go live on Thursday morning Thursday morning West Coast time, and noon Eastern with our live mailbag here on Peacock and Williamson. Make sure you subscribe up, hit the notification bell on YouTube so you know when we go live. Christian McCaffrey, does he deserve to be on this list? What players that weren't mentioned should be? I think Patrick Peterson was a good one that you brought up, Matt.
I think Peterson's a lock. I think I'm just going to say he was a 33rd team oversight because I think he's in.
Omission. Yeah. Were any players omitted? What do you guys think? And any other questions around the NFL? If you're interested in if you're interested in how many hot dogs were rolled over the 4th of July weekend in the Williamson household,
didn't take it on the boat with me, brother.
Let us know at BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter, or drop a question or comment on YouTube. And Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.